the chair being visible and present for those engagement events and that process, I think is going to be really important. So I just wanted to note that. Thank you.
Somebody do an official nomination at this point?
I am just the observer keeping this seat warm for right now. So I am not trying to guide the process in any way or the other. I'd love this to be a self-organized decision.
I think Jim's expressed enough hesitation. Adams indicated that the travel could be an issue. So despite the fact that you'd make a great chair, David as well would make a great chair. I'm gonna throw up my hand and say Adam, I think would make a great chair.
I tried that. You wouldn't fall for it.
Do you have any thoughts, David?
Early on, I realized that everybody in this room would do a good job. So I'm not concerned about it. I've done a lot of nonprofit board governance. I'm willing to do it. I'm not eager. So one thing that I wondered was the possibility of co-chairs. Something that I do with another board, but I don't know what the group thinks about that. And I don't, we'd have to work out chairing meetings and stuff like that, or dividing efforts. Would you rather have one target to shoot at, or?
We have a few different arrangements for co-chairs where some people will do the, chair or vice chair will do the admin, the agenda design and build and the working with staff, and the other one will run the meeting.
Right.
That works out quite well. I quite actually do get a bit concerned the vice chair doesn't have a lot of roles sometimes. So any kind of taking some burden off of chair and sharing that out makes sense to me. Works.
I'd look at my council colleague. I mean, I don't have any objection to a co-chair. I would actually maybe even encourage it, just given the working nature of this committee and the length of the service and the type of commitment that it's going to be. I think that co-chairs also provide each other with a bit of a thinking partner going into some of the agenda planning and looking at some of the documents. So I'd be open to that. I'm looking for any quiet head nods or head shakes from my other council members here in the room, and seeing some nods, so they seem into that idea.
I'd be supportive of co-chairs.
Second to that.
Okay. Yeah. I don't see it, a lot of hats in the ring. So, it sounds like Jim and David here might be reluctant but willing leaders of this ship here for the time being. I don't want to force you into a job that you're not feeling passionate about or interested in, but I'm curious whether that speaks to you or whether you would be open to.
Yeah, I have no problem with that. I think the biggest thing for me will be the fact that when I'm not here physically, is that going to make a big difference? And I think it would. I think it would make a difference when you're having a meeting like this and we're trying to deal with someone on that. So that would alleviate that. So if that now opens it up to someone else who is interested in a co-chair role, I'm happy to decide if that is of interest as well. So more than happy to help out work.
I just want to say I'm grateful to both of you for being willing to consider chairing. I think it's important for us. And, I come from a kumbaya background, under the facilitating, but not Robert's rules. And I didn't even consider that possibility. So I'm really grateful that you will.
Our show food safety, how does it work?
Sorry?
I'm just going to mute you for background noise, but I'm thrilled to be able to hear you.
Okay. I mean, and I think there's a real nice harmony of experience there with David's community development work, as well as Jim's technical planning expertise and background on a high level as well. So perhaps we can get a motion that sounds something like
The committee recommends to council that.
Committee recommends to council that Jim Crandalls and David McCollum be appointed as the co-chairs of the official community plan steering committee. Moved by Glenn, seconded by Betty. Any further discussion? All in favor, raise your hand. Say aye.
Hi.
Great, and that carries. So now I'll let you two play rock, paper, scissors.
Yeah, we can-
Okay, so I guess I need to look at the agenda.
I'll move one seat over and I can help.
Stay, you can still see. Sit there.
Oh, so he did all this so he can leave at noon and
Is interesting. Welcome.
First order of business, which will be to remind me of Robert's rules when I screw them up at the beginning. So I'll have to, one of my first pieces of homework will be to remind myself of Robert's rules. Haven't done it well.
I've got a great little practice for you. We actually had 2 sets of minutes to adopt.
Okay.
Housekeeping to warm up.
Okay, so which ones did we adopt?
The September, so it's on page 2.
Oh, yeah.
I can just get you a visual there of who's on the screen behind your head.
I think I'll have to join the Zoom meeting.
We're doing Zoom meeting?
Yeah. Never gets to read the agenda material that they only skimmed.
The Zoom, join Zoom.
Oh, so Andrew missed something on you.
I did.
Well, it was tricky.
Do that on purpose.
I
Yeah,
had my one mistake, I'm out.
yeah, that's it. Do yourself. Yes, yes. Go.
Right. And do I
Yeah, and then
turn on mic?
There you go. That's fine, just so you can,
just drag that.
Sorry, which?
you want to drag it to that screen.
Oh, I see what you mean.
There you go.
Gotcha.
So then if people are talking, you have to turn and look behind you.
Perfect. Okay, got it. Okay. Well, welcome everyone. So continuing on with our agenda, we're on item 2.2.
Yep.
And these are the minutes of our October 29th meeting. Does anybody have any questions, amendments, or spiel?
Yeah.
Yeah. Any
Additions or
additions, omissions, objections? Okay. Okay, so then can I get someone to move the adoption of the minutes? So we have Mr. McCollum and seconded by Mr. Skirren. Favor, raise your hand and say aye. Is that correct?
Mhm.
Okay, so moved. Okay, yay.
Yay.
Oh, that was tough. Okay. So we're going to go back to the agenda that we had. So we're now on number 5, which is business arising from the minutes. So the technical memo 5.1. And Daniel, are you going to be presenting this? Sure. Yeah. Okay, I will turn it over to you then.
Yes. Great.
I was just putting this sort of as I'm talking through it. So we've received this document from our consultant. It's the sort of start of their.
Speak up a bit.
Okay. And I know it's further from the end of the table than I'm used to.
Yeah.
We've received this document from McElhaney, our consultants. They were doing sort of an initial overview of our existing OCP. They have some recommendations in it and some findings based on what their experience with the document is. And they're looking for any feedback. So I know I have some initial thoughts that I was going to share with them, but I wanted to have this chance to go through it with the committee, just to say what they found and so sort of how it will guide them going forward. And some of this is sort of, almost end of the line piece as well. Like some of this is about the formatting of it. So what the finished OCP will look like. So in a sense, we're not going to get there for, a few phases of the work, but it's sort of been laying a stage for what the kind of document is that we want to come up with. So they say their report, they go through document structure and formatting, which is not always the most interesting, but it does deliver quite a bit. It's quite apparently reading the document. They talk about things we could remove or add to the OCP, terminology, and then maps and images. So their first finding is, I think, is something we heard from all the committee when we were first diving into our current document, which they say it's a long document that has 435 policies. They talk about how that reduces the ability for users to navigate through the document to locate required information. I think I would agree with that. So their recommendation is to seek opportunities to reduce the length of the OCP. And they talk about combining policies, embedding information in it, and eliminating information that's no longer relevant or excessive in detail. So one of the things we talk about is removing some of the details in it about like the reasons for the update. I think one of the things we see now in more recent OCPs often is some of like a lot of OCPs traditionally had that section of like this was the steering committee and this is the process we did and this is all the background. And often you'll see it now as like a separate document. You go to the OCP page, you have the OCP, and then there'll be another document and like, here, read our background on what we did. And it's all there for people. But when you actually just want to look at what are your OCP policies, you don't need that as part of the same document. Reducing number of vision statements, which is a confusing thing in our current OCP. There's a couple of different things. We'll say, like, this is our vision, and these are our goals, and can be confusing. Avoiding long repetitive lists of stuff. So these are other jurisdictions we deal with. These are other legislation that affects Bowen, things like that, which are sort of somebody's listed them and say these are things you need to be aware of, but maybe don't need to be in the OCP. Say that would be true whether they're listed or not. They did some examples that were nice of like how to reword policies so that they're clear and concise. They reduce length, they're improved. Yeah. Recommendation: avoid noting bill cooperate with other governing bodies, which I think sometimes is something that goes into OCP documents because you're kind of like, well, we know we can't control BC ferries, but some of the feedback we always heard was about the ferries. We'll put in, we'll cooperate with BC ferries to do something that's clearly their jurisdiction. And then reduce the amount of history provided at the start of each section. So each section in the current OCP has like a page that kind of talks about this is the topic and this is some detail about it. And their recommendation is the OCP is not intended to provide historic perspective, but it's about the regulation of what's actually in the document. Some other stuff about wayfinding. So this is for a planner. They say the most important information is located late in the document, so the land use information. And they note that like the table of contents, all of the sections start with the same preamble towards a sustainable future. Which clearly was a focus of the OCP, but makes it hard when you're actually looking at the table of contents and sort of, what are these sections? You're just reading the same thing each time. Yeah, so recommendation to reorganize the OCP from a user's perspective. So when somebody actually is new to this document and they're opening it for the first time and they're trying to figure out stuff in it, how do you set it up so that it's helpful for them? There's some things like the current OCP documents on our website has things like blank bullet points, blank pages. And I think some of those have come in through consolidations over the years. Like I think if you look in the OCP that was adopted, it doesn't have those, but over time when we edited it and gets consolidated, I think those have come in into the document. So for common sense stuff, remove those pieces.
Daniel?
Yes.
On the consolidation bit, we've never done an official consolidation, right? It's just been.
Well, it's the corporate officer as we adopt amendment bylaws, right? So we've adopted, a series of amendment bylaws to to the bylaw, and then the corporate officer at the time will have consolidated.
But there's an official consolidation versus just putting them together, I thought, from a process perspective.
We've never done an official.
And we haven't done the official, and that would get rid of all that sort of stuff.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Sorry, when you say an official, you mean that you have a consolidated document that stays live every time amendments are added to it?
Well,
Or
that's what's
that's-
happening now.
Okay,
But if you did the official consolidation, it would replace what's there as the official document, rather than going back and looking
at all the
at
amendments.
all the little bylaws.
Right.
I
So
had,
council would adopt a consolidated
Yeah,
version. So what we
yeah.
do now is council adopts an amended bylaw, and then we update it on the website and we say, for your information,
yeah,
you know, we consolidated this, but legally it's still the original.
and it has some funnies in it when you do that, that you'd have it fixed. Yeah.
Recommend, so our current OCP has an implementation section. So they recommend actually avoid repeating policies in the implementation plan, which is what it currently does. If you go to section 11 of our OCP, it's kind of listing like, oh, these are all the policies that you read previously in the document. And so you get kind of, but some of them are like reworded a little bit, or they're sort of, they collapse a couple and you're like, well, is that the actual policy we're implementing this one? And they talk about instead trying to do, you know, some sort of table checklist so that then, you know, the goal would be we're able to report, and it's kind of like a strategic plan then, or reporting to council and saying like, you know, this was meant to happen in 2027, and these ones didn't happen. And it's a way to check progress of it. All right, items to be removed or added. Obviously, information and stats are updated to be updated. That makes sense. Update the planning process to be what we do currently. The example B they list, I think, is something that will come up. So that the 12 fundamental goals of the OCP, they say may be outdated, goals may have been achieved or may not be relevant. So it should be reviewed during public engagement to gauge content, relevance, or replacement. We wonder if these are principles for the OCP as opposed to goals. Goals are typically measurable, while principles are more like rules or laws that govern what you do and how you achieve your goals. And I think I always had in my mind that reviewing the 12 fundamental goals was something that like the engagement plan would do. Be saying these were the goals of the OCP. Are these still what we want to do? I think it's a valuable thing to do in an OCP review section to say these were the goals 10 years ago. Let's you know, even if it's to reaffirm them, it's a good check-in point. Okay. Stats, targets, timelines through the document are outdated. Makes sense. They talk about the density reallocation, which I know it has an interesting history in our OCP and something that changed. I think that's probably the largest section that changed between the draft OCP that came from the steering committee and the adopted bylaw. There's an interesting like change that was done for density reallocation policies. So if you look at some islands trusts that use much more like prescribed density reallocation systems in their OCP and then in their land use planning as a result. So I've talked to planners on like, I think it's Denman, where they say like, oh, we have a bank of units that we will allocate. And Bowens is not that prescriptive and it's never been implemented. So something to review.
We had a rezoning proposal a number of years ago, which was between two areas, and they were going to transfer density from one to the other. It was just, it got split off and that never happened. It's not really working.
I mean, what's like an interesting thing in our current OCP is that we have developed below the limits of the OCP consistently. So we've never used the density allocation piece, but we've never had to say we increased the density limits in our OCP, in part because Cape Rapid Curtis in the original 2010 document, for 96 was like 200 and something units that was proposed, and then instead it was subdivided into 60, and essentially been using that like unofficially that bank of units. Say we are still below the limits in the OCP, even if council were to increase the density by, you know, 1 in this rezoning or 1 in this rezoning, we're still actually below the overall limits, even though there hasn't been like a density allocation transfer that's happened. Right, so finding one, And then the recommendation one, a similar thing. So updating the planning process, checking in on the goals, updating statistics. They had to work with BIM staff to determine if density reallocation policies have been implemented, review transportation priorities, re-engage with the community to identify new priorities, determine which objectives and policies are still relevant. Recommendation 2. Other thing they've noted in their findings is that some of the policies in the OCP don't need to be there. Some of them are, would exist in a development procedure bylaw, subdivision servicing bylaw, zoning bylaw, building code. And I think my comment from that one was wanting to check in with them to say, it's true that, the actual policy then, or the bylaw would exist and would regulate it, but to some extent, the OCP is to say, we want that bylaw to do this thing. And maybe that's a good thing to happen there. Like if your goal is to say, we want our subdivision servicing bylaw to ensure that you're following, best sustainability practices or something more specific than that. Maybe it doesn't hurt to have that in your OCP, and then when you're doing your subdivision servicing bylaw update, well, I actually have direction for my OCP in terms of what that should look like. Where it maybe doesn't need to be the super detailed. It shouldn't be saying like, you should have one that does these things, and that's just what it has and it exists. Maybe that's fine, but if there's sort of overarching direction that it wants to provide, that maybe could still be valuable. But then I'd agree, they talk about, making sure it's BC building code. It's kind of always a silly one when it's like, you need to follow provincial rules. It's like, well, if the policy didn't exist, you would still have to follow provincial laws. It doesn't change. They highlight some of the circular development permit area stuff, which is true. So we have a section that has development permit areas, but then sprinkled throughout the document, it's like in this development permit area, you have to do these things. It makes it hard for an applicant or even staff to look at. So in this development permit area, you have to do these set of guidelines, plus this one policy that's on page 70 and this one policy that's on page 80. It's like not very user friendly. And then, a big focus from them, ensuring that policies clearly state the goal or the intended outcome of the policy. So if you have a policy, it should be saying this is what you have to do. It should, you should be able to tell what the policy wants you to do. They were positive about the policy structure throughout the document, objectives and policies, and they recommend that going forward. They say some policies and objectives are opinion-based. And they flagged my least favorite objective, which is relating to the opinion of the director of planning. I always defer and say, well, we don't have a director of planning, so we're fine.
What you wish for.
So ensure all policies are inclusive, directive, objective in nature. But there's still some that are relevant, which is true. So we don't want to, we're not doing a wholehearted replacement, but it's making sure that things are still relevant. We're retaining them, but it's sort of checking in with them. They found, frequent repetitive language. So ensure, support, encourage. They want to reduce instances of repetitive language. And they go through things like the municipality may consider, or things like encourage or ensure. And so if the policy is, municipality will encourage something, it's a little vague and a little, what exactly are we doing to encourage? They found some of our land use management stuff confusing. And then I think, which is very true, is that it's confusing in our OCP that we have a housing section and we have a land use management section. So there'll be, residential policies in our land use management, and then there'll be housing policies in our housing objective. And it's sometimes hard to balance those two, or like, why are there two different things to look at? Residential land use and housing, and they're kind of fairly similar. My big point, I think, for this too, is that maybe I should go later, so I'll go later. Maps and graphics, they were critical of some of the graphics in our OCP, which may be true. And desire for more graphics, or saying some of the text can be replaced with graphics, have maps incorporated into the document. It's all good. Okay, number of land use designations may be excessive, so I think that'll be a big topic. It's like, are there excessive land use designations, or, are these actually distinct areas of our RCP? The big thing for me with our land use designations currently is that, I would think ideally each land use designation, you could then find policies that relate to that land use designation, and that currently does not exist in our RCP. So, for example, like Artisan Square is in a designation that's called artisan commercial. And if you look for the term artisan commercial in the OCP, there's nothing that says in the artisan commercial designation, we think these things should happen. Or where the TUP exists for the Kiwi temporary building is in a designation called service commercial. And there's no policies or description of what happens in a service commercial land use designation. So it makes it quite challenging if somebody says, I want to rezone, what's consistent with my OCP land use designation? I would like to be able to pull the council and say, these are the policies that relate to the service commercial land use designation. And so we say, well, there's nothing. And broadly speaking, the OCP likes these type of things to happen in commercial areas.
So I'm not sure if this is where to bring that up, but, I clued into it yesterday when we had the council meeting, we were looking at a rezoning. The designations in the OCP don't match what's the built environment from history. So by putting designations in that are different than what was there when people built, and now the whole place is built out, we've ended up making people not conform to the OCP. And then that causes horrible problems if a house burns down or something like that, so.
Yeah, and so like subdivision, like large areas of Bowen, the lot sizes are significantly smaller than the OCP says we allow.
Yeah.
So we'll have it where, in the neighborhood, most of the lots were subdivided in the 20s. And you could do it with a plan in New Westminster, I don't know, like Miller's Landing, David Road, whatever. They're all quite small lots. And if you look at the land use, the OCP designation, I think it's 1 hectare lot sizes, and most of the lots are 1/4 acre.
And then when you do.
And then there'll be some that are bigger, and they'll say, oh, I can see all my neighbors are this size, I'd like to subdivide too. We say, well, you have to be 2 acres in size to subdivide to be 1 acre. And they say, but they're all tiny, and we say, well, that's what it is. So I think that's like a discussion.
Yeah.
Now, some of the areas like that, some of the lots are smaller that like you couldn't get septic in well now. So it's a discussion, but it comes up quite a bit when there's like a larger lot in an area where all the other lots are smaller, but the OCP doesn't allow them to subdivide. They'll always say, but I can see all my neighbors are small. I just want to be the same as them. And they say, well, that was done before we had this OCP in place and before the land use bylaw was in place.
So is that policy inconsistencies with your, I'm assuming it's consistent with the zoning bylaw?
Lots of places they're smaller than we would allow.
Is it the zoning bylaw is smaller than the OCP?
No, but the lots are smaller than this.
So it's legally non-compliant.
Yeah. So, and people ask me sort of, is that intentional or is that an accident? And I say, well, I wasn't there at the time, but it can be intentional. Like you could intentionally say, well, lots were created in the 20s, right? It's not appropriate given what we know now about whatever space needed for septic and water and wells and everything else, topography, and so maybe it's intentional or maybe it's an oversight.
But it would appear that in the OCP or the zoning bylaw that it's intentional. So you have to, so you have a policy issue there that whether or not you want to deal with that. The OCP, is that what you're saying?
Yeah.
So
Why is that an issue? Because the OCP is the vision statement for moving forward.
Yeah.
That doesn't mean that everything behind you has to comply.
No, so I think it's not necessarily an issue. But it is an issue for the people who own the houses, struggle with it, right? If they own a lot that's larger that they would like to be able to subdivide, and they would like to be able to subdivide to match their neighbors, And so it'd be nice, but then as part of this review process, it can be like, no, we think that is appropriate. And then we point, if people have that same issue, we say, well, this was something we thought about during the OCP review, and we confirm that yes, we would like, the vision statement is for these larger lots, and even though you may think it's not fair based on your neighbors got to subdivide. that's not driving our land use.
I guess what I was getting at is for all those people that are on those smaller lots and are built. There's, by not having the same designation that matches what they built to, then they've got huge problems. Insurance wise and everything else when they go, when then there's any damage issues.
But not necessarily, like our zoning would allow, you know, if they're on a smaller lot than we allow now, they have a house on it, the zoning allows them to build a house.
But a smaller house or different setbacks and lot coverage rules and all that stuff, so then it becomes quite an onerous process to rebuild.
But with the municipalities change the bylaws constantly, yeah. So like even now, right, they call the setbacks only change. Then
So
suddenly
all those
everybody's
houses on small
non-conforming.
lots in Vancouver are all legal non-conforming?
Well, no, but they're all over the place. The legal non-conforming happens because you change bylaws.
But I guess but it's already built and already
Yeah,
there,
but
so
they
why
can-
not make it legal?
Yeah, but they have to do that constantly because council should have the power, the ability to make change. So like, I mean, like, and then you have variances, you have existing non-conforming, it's all part of the system.
Yeah, well, I don't want to debate it now, but I think it's an issue, you know, from my perspective.
It would sound like the one takeaway around that is that if it is an intentional policy change to make it more clearer in the OCP that it is intentional as opposed to getting the question saying, well, I don't know if that was really the intent. I mean, clearly these lots are, small, you know, or whatever the circumstance is, that to be deliberate in language in the OCP around it being, you know, I mean, it's obvious it's a policy change if it says that on the date. But if you're getting issues that's probably what I would take away from that. You're getting interpretation issues.
Yeah.
So.
Yeah, and that makes sense, and then there's a point, so I guess this was considered, and this was vision for going forward. Yeah.
Just designate the ones that haven't been subdivided, under the new designation, and create a designation that, you know, means the ones that already exist to build are legal.
I think we'll have many more discussions about that.
Yeah.
Okay, next section, compliance with the Local Government Act. So we've highlighted some of the changes that are needed. In particular, things around housing needs report. So council actually yesterday received our interim housing needs report. And so that's one of the main sections that now would have to be included and considered in an OCP review.
That is linked to the information items of the agenda.
The other piece is related to Islands Trust, so Islands Trust policy statement, and they're noting that the work the Islands Trust is doing right now to update their policy statement, which does prevent some challenges in terms of, you know, currently to adopt an OCP bylaw, we have to comply with the current Islands Trust policy statement and the list of directive policies in that statement. And so one of the things we'll do working through it is ensure that we are complying with those policy statements. They link at the back of the technical memo to show, you know, the checklist that was submitted with the previous OCP, and then some of the correspondence sent from the executive committee showing like their review of it and highlighting that they were concerned some things weren't in compliance at that time. And I think I didn't drag back through the drafts, but I imagine we made some amendments to our OCP bylaw in response to that feedback. But where it gets challenging is thinking about if the Islands Trust is bringing forward an amended policy statement, and those processes are working parallel, or, you know, I would anticipate we are ahead of their timing. But if they have a functioning draft that they're seeking comment on, becomes a thing of, well, are we future-proofing the OCP by going through and saying, well, let's check if we actually comply with the new updated policy statement as well as the current one.
Although, I mean, would it be fair to say that, you know, I wouldn't imagine that the Islands Trust, that any new policy statement is going to be drastically different to the point that it will render all of the other OCPs that exist across the islands obsolete.
No, I think it would work the same way too, like if they updated the policy statement, that if it's only at the point of us amending our OCP that would say, okay, now we need to amend our OCP to come into compliance with the new policy statement. But but it just might make like future amendments more complicated. Because then they would say, well, you know, now you have to comply with these new statements. You need like broader changes than you thought you were gonna bring for amendment.
It's been a while. So the policy statement from the trust there, we're going it through a series of many of the whole and working through it section by section. And the biggest amendments are adding a whole lot of material on First Nations governing bodies and collaborating in that way. So I don't think any of the ecological stuff is going to change drastically at all.
And then at the end of their memo, they go through some key areas for future discussion with the steering committee. So they talk about future proofing the OCP, anticipating. So one is what happens if we get to over 5,000, and then there's other housing requirements that get triggered by provincial legislation. So how are we incorporating that into the OCP? So that's the small scale multi-unit housing. So if Bowen were over 5,000 population, the Local Government Act requires that you permit small scale multi-unit housing on areas within your municipality that don't fit under some of the exemptions. So primarily on Bowen, what is interesting is like it only applies for places that are on water and sewer, municipal water and municipal sewer, say. So for example, that would mean Catesville. If Bowen was over 5,000, we'd be required to update our zoning bylaw to permit that. So that it's like, how does the OCP anticipate that? Or does it not? And it says, you know, that's a future problem.
Sorry, so those requirements specifically exempt those rules if you're on a septic or private water system?
Yeah, they only apply if you're on municipal water, municipal. Yeah.
Whether or not that system could accommodate that is moot.
Well, I mean, that's the discussion we've had, because so when they brought it in, there was a provision for municipalities to seek extensions if they could say, you know, there's no capacity in our sewer system. I think the province was looking for like, you know, a timeline and a plan, as opposed to like, well, we're at capacity. When we have enough money to expand it, we'll let you know. I don't think was like an acceptable thing. So I know I've communicated with them saying, how does that work then if, you know, because the legislation itself says you have to do it by this date, or you have to do an extension by, you know, you have to apply for an extension by this date and you have to have it done by this date. And I was like, okay, so what happens when the census comes out? You know, Census Canada drops the, you know, new numbers and it's like, oh, well, it's 5,001 people. We now have to come into compliance, but there's no timeline. There's nothing. It's just like, we're now not in compliance as of immediate. And so my hope is that they will, in advance of that, be doing that work. But so I think this is flagging, you know, like if that happened and tomorrow Bowen was at 5,000 people and we have to update, it wouldn't just be a land use bylaw change, but we have to update our OCP because our OCP, you know, says on the Catesville, you can have single family houses and duplexes. I think, I'm not totally sure, but if it said that and then the original legislation says you have to allow fourplexes, it could be amended in the OCP, I guess, as well, to say, you allow this housing technology. They say future discussion, establish whether or not it should be an operating principle of the OCP. Sorry, to lost my place to organize the document from a user's perspective. I think we probably have more discussion with them about what exactly that means or how that would look. They want to talk about reducing overlap among the 435 policy statements. I think that's like, I think 435 is too many. It's just an overview. So if there is ability to reduce overlap, that seems like a good thing. They talk about explore opportunities to reduce the number of land use designations. Yeah, which may have merit or may not. You know, I often think sometimes, you know, we end up with distinctions or differences because we feel like there are differences. And you know, I guess I'm challenged, you know, if we go in with a goal like, well, we can't have more than 7 land use designations. It's like, well, maybe it's better to say how many different areas do we have on Bowen and figure out designations for each of them. But then I think I would want to ensure that then there's clear like policy about that land use designation. So we think this is special enough to have its own designation, and that means this. And when I was, like, we had multiple different park designations, and I was thinking about that, like, other, some places just say park, and we have, you know, park, and we have regional park. We have provincial park as designation, that doesn't have to happen. Consolidate vision, principles, objectives of the plan, we can put it in the public. All maps into the document, consolidate the permit areas in one place. Language. Discuss restructuring implementation section of the plan, so including like a table of actions. This second of all important, discuss what has worked well in the current OCP with administration and the steering committee. So as the good is not lost in the update of the OCP, and I think that's some future work to do. Obviously, I'm not quite sure where this is here, but engage the public and other key stakeholders to inform the update of the OCP, I think we're all on board with. Yeah, so that was kind of the end of their review document. And so I wanted to bring it, and part of anything else, it's flagged that we provide feedback to McElhaney on this document. If there's anything else that we should be including going forward.
Did you feel like from the planning side, there was something they missed?
I think that the main thing for me was just that that the land use designations aren't listed, like aren't described. That's one of my, one of my challenges with the OCP, is I wanted that to be included. And the other thing is they talk about, when looking at the provincial legislation, they say it's something about, you know, confirming if we need to update residential densities because of the interim housing needs report. And I just wanted to confirm with them that we don't have to, because of the interim housing needs report, we did sure we didn't need to increase the number.
Overall, I thought it was a good document. I think they've covered a lot of restrictions that we had as well. So I think there's lots of room for them to already take action on. A couple things is so the housing needs is kind of not a map on anything, but I'd appreciate kind of an overview of that document, whether it be this meeting or sometime in the future. And the only thing, and I guess it'll come in, but again, putting on my engineering hat, it's around infrastructure, and there was that word didn't come up anywhere in here. So maybe it's inherent that infrastructure will come into play as we evolve. And I think there are two key areas for future discussion. I know on our agenda we're supposed to be talking about a workshop session. So, you know, I think they provided a lot of information here. That seems like it's good content for that workshop.
And I see a question in chat from Adam saying, are we able to take a longer look and follow up? And I'm going to say yes, absolutely. I think we'll provide initial feedback on them after this meeting, but then we're not slated to meet with them until January. So, you know, we get comment through like probably the first week of December, and you know, we can provide that. And then obviously if it's feedback on the pieces that are about like drafting the new OCP, I don't think like that isn't scheduled for us until the summer, winter 2025 phase. So, you know, we have time to provide feedback of like, this is what we think.
Sorry, one more question I forgot, and that's around land use designations. Question around that. Do you fully anticipate that you're gonna ultimately have to update the zoning bylaw after this? And would that be consolidating the land use designations with the LCP and then handling varied types within the zoning bylaw?
I mean, we're currently up to 20 something comprehensive development zones. That I feel like is excessive, but somehow every rezoning, I talk myself into like, this one really needs a CD bill.
There's some consolidation of.
Yeah, I know. I can't ask them to review our land bylaw. Yeah. I do think actually with that super the one timing piece that's funny of this is so that the provincial legislation requires that we update our land use bylaw to reflect the number of units needed in our housing needs report. So they're by December of 2025. So I have slated for like early 2025 to review our land use bylaw, the number of units that are in it. And if we don't have 1,393 housing units available in our land use bylaw, we will have to update our land use bylaw by December 2025 in advance of the OCP work. So it's kind of, it's not ideal timing. Like if the timing for that was 2027, it would work perfectly because we would do the new OCP and then I could review the land use bylaw and update it to match our new OCP and meet provincial legislation, but I won't. So we'll be doing this potentially parallel update of the land use bylaw in advance of the OCP review.
Yeah, I was wondering if there's, there wasn't much about the process in there, like, where did we start? Do we start with the principles, go to the goals, do we, do we follow kind of the text, so to speak, from page one? Or do they have this Echo McLean, have they have a certain system in place or process in place that we should follow? Like, well, one thought that I have, it's not gonna happen, by the way, but if our existing OCP first be put in the right form. Yeah, that would make it really easy. But you know what I mean, like, where do you start? Like, I thought that if you talk about the vision, and if you don't agree with the vision, then you're not going to agree with everything after it, right? So now, if you have the vision, and then you say, well, should the vision be adjusted, or are we still happy with it? And then if you go to a public meeting, then you can say, well, we still think it's a great vision or not. And then you need to publish the decision. Like I find the 9 goals far less effective with the vision. It's the 9 goals you want to, we probably want to change those, but where do they really fit in? I don't know where they fit in.
You're so wonderfully bumping into the workshop. So that is part of the workshop discussion, which is like the piece that I'll bring after this discussion of discussing timing for that, engagement. In that workshop and some. So don't want to say too much. I don't know if you have other things you want to finish talking now, but you're already touching on the where the key points go.
I think some of that, anyone else have like specific comments about that technical memo? Or we can move on to talking about McLean all-day planning workshop.
Or there's a housing needs
that's
report
right.
piece too. I don't know if we want to do first.
Right, okay, so we'll go back to technical memo. Does anybody have anything else they want to bring up regarding the technical memo that was provided? Or as I said, we are open to taking more comments and we'll collect them by sort of mid-December.
Were they actually expecting some comments? Was this?
They were open to comments. They didn't need comments, I think, but if we, there's something we disagree with or want to add, okay, they're open to that.
Do we have until when?
I was saying mid-December, I don't pick a date here. More just like in time for them to incorporate anything into our next meeting. If it's by December 12th, no, 13th, Friday.
Friday the 13th.
Friday the 13th, that ominous for anyone?
So I was wondering, the comment about the land use bylaw being updated. I have a recollection that the new provincial legislation requires our land use bylaw designations to mirror the OCP, that it's not applying and giving goodies to get the extra, the OCP density anymore. So if you had a 100-acre parcel and it was able to be zoned into 10-acre lots, then that has to be reflected in the zoning bylaw. So you don't apply to. That's somewhere.
Yeah, so,
That's something.
Yeah.
Just in response to the question about updating the land use bylaw. I guess the other question, or thought that came to mind was when the housing needs assessment says we need X number of units. If you took our 1,800 lots and they all are allowed as a secondary dwelling, then you've got your 1,800, your extra units, don't you? Already?
Yeah, so with the first one, what the local government act requires is that, so a municipality must permit the use and density of use necessary to accommodate at least the 20-year total number of housing units required to meet anticipated housing needs, which total number is included in the most recent housing needs report. So you must adopt it by December 31st. Adopt the zoning bylaw to permit the use and density of use required to be permitted under this section.
I was thinking more of the section where they got rid of you had to create an amenity bylaw.
Yeah,
You
with
couldn't-
all those pieces, yeah.
Anymore. Ask people to go from their land use bylaw density to the OCP density. You can't say, give us this.
Yeah, so this is more discussion, I guess, for the interim housing needs report, which I can jump into. The one that's on our agenda, it went to council yesterday for adoption. So
But can we just, let's just close this one off, just so that we're clear. Is anybody, so if you have any additional questions or thoughts on that, to get them to you by December 13th?
Yeah.
Okay.
Can I just,
Yeah.
do you want it to go to the group so that people can see each other's
Sure.
comments?
Yeah.
Okay, so we'll send it to OCPSC and NBC.
So then, Daniel, before you get into the next item on the interim housing needs report, could you just, by the way, I know we've talked about this before to committee, but just for the benefit of the non-council members, who probably understand this in spades, maybe give us a little bit more of an overview, backgrounder on this very quickly, so that we can understand the context of where this is today as well. In your,
sorry, for the interim housing needs
Yes.
report? Perfect. The municipality, we completed a housing needs report in 2020 under then provincial requirements. In fall of 2024, fall of 2023, the province passed new requirements that municipalities had to do housing needs reports. They had to include a 20-year projected housing need, and they had to follow prescriptive requirements for methodology. And in sort of this spring of 2024, the province put out that methodology. So they have a whole document on it. UBC partnered with them and made like an online version of how to calculate it. For us, it was done actually. Metro Vancouver Housing took on doing this work for a number of municipalities. So they produced our report. And it projects, the 20-year and the 5-year housing need for municipalities based on this methodology. It has some interesting things that are different than like traditional old school way of housing projections or population projections. So it's not enough to just take, past growth and project it forward. So for some numbers, it looks at like a regional rate. So even like homelessness, rather than looking at like people who are experiencing homelessness in your community, it wants you to look at that number across the region and then assign proportionally to your area. And some of the methodology says, some of the big variation of the number of homelessness in a community is based on which communities have built shelter beds. So if your community has funded and built shelter beds, or BC Housing is funding and built shelter beds in your community, you may have a higher number of people experience homelessness in your community. But in some sense, it's not been fair for other communities to like block and oppose building shelter beds in their communities and then say, well, it's not a problem in our community. There's nobody experiencing homelessness here. Right. And the province is saying, well, no, that's because, the shelter beds went in the community next door, but it's not enough then to be like, it's not a problem. They looked at something they call suppressed household formation. So they wanted to consider the rate at which different age demographics formed households in 2006, I think, and compare that to now. And they would say if you are, so sort of the thesis is like, if you have housing scarcity in your community, you will see less household formations. So a classic could be, adult children are remaining at home longer. So you'll see fewer households of people in their 20s because they can't afford housing, they're staying with their parents longer. Or it's that, people are divorcing in their 40s, but they're still living together because there's nowhere else on Bowen for them to find housing. So, if the housing situation was more ample, they would have moved apart, but instead they're living together. Yeah, so you sort of have put together all those different pieces to come up with this number. And
Right, where,
yeah, do you want to go down to page 9?
Yeah.
That's
just giving it a stroke.
So the interim housing needs report goes into all those different sections. Gives like some blurb on like this is how the calculation is done. And then, yeah, that's just a summary at the end. So if you go down a little bit more stuff, it shows, and then up, sorry, up.
The one that says.
That one, yeah. So the total 20-year housing need, and then the 5-year housing need for some categories is just 20-year divided by 4, and for others it's divided in half, I believe. So like the homelessness. So the province said it's not enough for you to say, well, we'll house all the people experiencing homelessness over 20 years. You need to have more accelerated time for that number. So for Bowen, that's where we come with this number of needing, in 20 years, we need 1,393 new units of housing. And so in September, we brought a report to council that looked at what's the current OCP capacity. So we looked at how many vacant residential lots do we have? And say, okay, those are existing lots that exist that can build housing. And we looked at within the zoning bylaw, where are comprehensive development zones that have lots remaining to be built. So primarily on Bowen, that's like the Grafton Lake development and the Seymour Bay development, as well as some other places have some few remaining units left. And then we looked at where under the current OCP land use designations can you subdivide and create additional lots. And interestingly on Bowen, like that's primarily, there's some larger properties that have, more significant lots that could be in theory subdivided and created based on the current OCP designation. So you think it's like Enville Farm. It's quite, it's quite a large number. There's a large lot at the end of Blue Water that OCP designation is quite high. There's a large lot that's in between Rebellias and Tunstall Bay. As you come up, you can see on that, it's quite large. It has quite a large number. And so we looked at that total number of lots that would be possible under OCP designation. And then after talking to the province, then we allocated for each of those lots, we said 2 units could be created. Because we said, when you subdivide the lots, you could create on those lots a house and a secondary suite or a detached secondary suite. So we will count those as 2 units that could be created under OCP. And I don't have it in front of me, but we essentially came with a number that was higher than 1,393. So we said, okay, our current OCP is in compliance with the provincial legislation. There are enough units within our OCP that you would need the 20-year projected housing need. What that doesn't do is it doesn't reflect on like, is that the type of housing that Bowen wants to see going forward, right? Because that's sort of saying, well, it meets the housing needs because we can create 5-acre lots and there'll be a house and there'll be a secondary suite. And so we have enough units. So our review is entirely, there are physically enough units in the OCP to meet that. And then we'll be doing something similar for the land use bylaw. And I think we'll be talking to the province again. If we are in the same situation where it's like, well, if we allocate a house and a suite on each new lot, and then it's sort of the thing too of like, well, which we didn't do for the OCP. It's like, well, what if every house built a suite? There'd be that many more housing units in theory that are possible, but it seems like, but we know that not every house builds a suite. It's a little, I'm not quite sure how to account for that.
Does the outcome, does this report and its numbers then become legislatively enforceable? Like, do you have to apply those now? Or?
Yeah, I mean, we did the OCP one because I wanted to do it in advance to know if, if I did the numbers and it was like, oh, we have to include 300 more units of housing in our OCP. And I wanted to know that going into the review to go before we're talking about land use designations. So like, well, we have to increase.
Yeah.
So it's like, I don't think it hasn't reached that point yet where nobody's been tested with it. And I've sort of watched as different municipalities bring their reports and bring their interim housing needs reports. And they say, oh, we need this many more units. And then their councils haven't come along and then amended because they haven't hit that timeline yet. Like I know with the small scale multi-unit housing, if people watch the news, like West Vantage, they said they weren't going to adopt the small scale multi-unit housing. And the province came back and said, you have to update it. And West Van did update it to them. Yeah.
So remind me, how many units do you currently have?
do we currently have capacity for an OCP?
No,
Oh,
just,
up.
I'm just trying to get a sense of, okay, 13, that's a
Yeah.
lot.
It's
Right,
Like,
like
Bowen
that's
has-
a doubling of our,
like 2,200.
yeah,
Yeah,
so another third anyway.
yeah. So when I got that number, I was like, oh, it's more than I thought. Yeah.
So also. Obviously, a lot of the properties that have potential are privately owned.
Yeah.
You can't force a private owner to do anything. So this is more about making sure you allow for, not necessarily achieve. Right?
Yes.
And it's that property owner.
So the idea is like there will be enough zone capacity on Bowen that without council approving any more additional zonings,
Right.
this many number of units could be built.
Yeah.
But yes, if it's all owned by one owner owns the property and they're like, well, I'd rather not develop it, then it sits.
Then now, but there's lots on the wrong location, or lots of them, because the OCP says that the densification has to happen in the code. So then you have to change more than like in reality. You see what I mean? Like, then you're going to basically densify the whole island, which may be okay, but it's not what the OCP.
So it would be based on like what that number is based on our OCP designations today.
No, I mean, I understand why you have that number. One thing is that it's in reality, you want to build much smaller units, like the apartment style units, and they're all in the code. Then the remaining number of units that can go into the rural areas still exists. So the total is going to be much higher. Because like it's what the OCP said. Like is that kind of that whole density transfer is also based on the idea of getting units out of the rural areas. Otherwise you can transfer them, right? So the whole thing doesn't work.
We have Adam, he's got his hand up, and then Council Morrison, you have something else to add after Adam?
I think that
Oh.
one answered.
Oh,
Well,
okay, so
I
just
wanted to
Adam.
pick up on Glenn's comment.
Thanks, James.
Go ahead.
Daniel, just
You're on
quick
mute.
question.
Or is it us?
Oh, no.
No.
I'll type it.
Okay, well,
Typing.
oh, Adam is typing. Any other questions?
Well, I guess it's picking up back on the comment that Glenn made. If we've got all this potential, but I know quite well, I'm recognizing some of the properties Daniel talked about, and I know one of them, there's no way they're gonna do anything. So it's a paper exercise and we're not gonna achieve that housing units because he has to build them. So is the province going to yeah, we've allowed for it, but it's not going to get built.
Yeah. Yeah, I mean, that's a simple question for Adam. He's saying, the report doesn't really touch on affordability. Do we know if the province intends to do further work or ask Bowen to do more work on that? I don't know, but I think that's kind of one of my points is like, okay, that, yeah, it is a paper exercise to say that like, we're in compliance with that provision of the Local Government Act, which is a different question than saying, you know, the OCP designations and housing policies address Bowen's housing need. You know, they're not, there's some overlap, but they're not the same thing. So this is saying, okay, the OCP steering committee doesn't have to consider increasing the number of units permitted in the OCP on Bowen. But the OCP steering committee should be thinking about what kind of policies do we need to support housing on Bowen.
So basically what you're saying is that a little bit of the academic exercise, this is not an impediment to what we will need to consider, or sorry, it's a context that we need to consider, but it's not a challenge that we have to go above and beyond in this thing and what might come out of new policy or areas. And it sounds like there'll be lots to discuss around that, so.
Be interested on this, going back to the infrastructure piece and reflecting on what you said, that, you know, I think densification is currently limited by rural systems, but a choice that the municipality has is to, I mean, most of the island is already covered by municipal communal water systems. Yes, there's a big lack of sewage, but a decision could be made to have communal sewage collection and treatment.
Yeah.
The other one that's coming to my mind is Ellen Point, where you control the land use and there is communal water, and there is communal sewage, but it's private.
Yeah.
So, is it, are those rules enforceable, with a private utility, or does it have to be municipally owned and operated?
But like the legislation for the small scale multi-unit housing is municipal.
It doesn't say public, it says municipal.
Yeah.
And not to be solved today, I'm just thinking about some of the choices around linking, we shouldn't believe that infrastructure is static, right? Like there's choices we have in terms of how we provide servicing to support housing choices and how we want to distribute density around the island.
Did you see the second part of Adam's?
Yeah, do you know the province tends to do further work or ask Bowen to do more work on that? So it's related to Daniel's comment about housing types. This is also related to Fritz's comment about where and what type of development we're going to prioritize in the new OCP. I would say, I don't know if the province will do further work. I might expect it, like.
Any other discussion on this one, or just a few seconds ahead of time, but it takes us to the next item, which is the all-day workshop. So Sophia.
Excellent, thank you. So a couple of pieces to go over about the workshop, as well as just a couple of things that have come up through here, just to answer your question, a great question. This is only the technical memo for the OCP. The next thing that we're receiving from them is their infrastructure review. So that's going to be a completely separate document. They have not completed that yet. We are in the process of working with the consultant to get them all of the information that they've requested in order to do that. And we're still working through that process at the moment. So hoping that that will be done by the time we do the workshop. But we haven't set an exact time yet.
Glenn, we could touch base with you too in terms of what we sent. What
Yeah.
our team is found to send and what, if you know what others that we could send.
Yes. Some good information is turning out to be a little bit more challenging than originally assumed. But they are also doing a whole mapping project as part of that as well, going through all of our GIS data. So that's kind of occurring in the background as we're going to as well. So full day workshop, I would talk to them, and it is not going to be a full day workshop for the steering committee itself. It will be a full day workshop for staff and the consultants as well, but the steering committee will only be a half day. So I really wanted to bring this to respect everyone's time. It's a huge time commitment. It's a big thing to plan for, to ask everyone to hear about 5 hours, go through this. So I wanted to kind of pull everyone preferences between morning or afternoon. And then I have a bunch of potential dates laid out and see if either we wanted to discuss and vote on a date and choose it now, or if it'll go home, think about it, and send that through afterwards, just to kind of see what would work best for everyone. So I don't know.
People online and missing, so I think the latter one is probably.
Yeah, I can bring up all the dates and things what we had, just so that everyone has that here. And then go from there. If that's chair, if you.
Sure, I think it even gives you an indication, are we talking about in the next month, 2 months, 3 months?
So this is January.
January.
Or even potentially very early February. So there's kind of two options. We can have a separate OCP steering committee meeting first before the workshop, or this could be the next meeting. It's really dependent on.
Is there a thought that we would, at the next steering committee meeting, have some input into the agenda for that? Is it, or what would be the intent of the next?
That's like kind of what I was trying to pose to everyone here until we have the information ready for that infrastructure review and to do that workshop. Are there topics the committee wants to discuss that we can have a meeting for, or is that really the next goal? It seems like some of the things that people are bringing up are things that would want to be discussed.
So maybe start with, I'm sure in terms of our general timeline and schedule, this workshop had an intent. What remind us of the.
Yeah, definitely. So this is really the preparation for community engagement plan. They are gonna have a draft of that plan to the committee 2 weeks before that workshop, so that everyone has time to review that and come and make comments. And then that was really going through some of the reports that they have with them and preparing our engagement strategy and plans for the rest of the project. So that's really the key piece there.
So I think almost like the in our agenda, the next meeting is proposed for the 21st of January. So it's kind of, I guess, for the committee, it's like either if that day works to instead be, you know, a half-day workshop, we do the workshop on the 21st. Or if the committee would rather say, well, we'll have that meeting, you know, and the consultants will get us the draft materials for the 21st, and then we'll do the workshop 2 weeks after that. So we've had like a pre-meeting strategy session and just the committee to then go into the workshop with the consultant, or would rather just do the one meeting on the 21st with the consultant and make that the workshop. That's kind of choices.
Yeah, and then
I'm a little concerned about the timeline for community engagement. If we leave it till the 21st, then we're not starting any community engagement until into February probably.
so the community engagement plan is for is to start in the spring of 2025 anyway. So that gives us still a couple of months before.
So not until March.
March, April is what we kind of projected. I can put the timeline up on the screen if that's helpful for everyone as well. Where we're at, so here we go. We're still very much in phase one, going through, we've received the assessment of the OCP accomplishments and kind of gap analysis. The infrastructure review is in progress. Base mapping is also in progress, which will all come together into one baseline findings report. And then we're preparing the workshop, which will be part of engagement and communication planning stage. So we're still in phase one up until January, February, jumping into phase two, which is when we would prepare the engagement materials based on what comes from that workshop and what the consultants are preparing to then actually really do our community engagement in that spring, summer of 2025.
I mean, so you're right, Allison, like the further that the workshop pushes back, then we start this gets in, because, you know, it's like we're gonna meet and then they're still gonna have to do stuff after that. So this isn't until end of February that we meet, then we're. then I'm very concerned
We
about
should
it all.
aim for January, yeah.
Yeah, so when I was speaking with the consultants, we were proposing with them potentially January 27th, 29th as an option for them, or that first week of February, the 3rd, 4th, 5th, or 6th. As times, because December at this point with holidays and everyone's timeline, I feel like it's just off the table. So I don't know if anyone has any specific thoughts on those, or if I will put those in email for people to provide their availability, because it really would be ideal if everyone could attend as much as possible, because that will be.
Yeah, I'm not waiting until February.
Then I will go ahead with sending an email to everyone with those dates and times, asking for morning or afternoon. And in a timeline maybe of would organizing all of this, everyone have time by Monday to make a decision on their timing and cut that back to me by Monday? Does that seem like an appropriate amount of time?
Yeah, and I guess just consensus from the committee of that. Is the committee happy, like going to that meeting as our next meeting, is that workshop, or do we want to have a separate committee meeting?
What would we have on the agenda for a separate committee?
Kind of just be, it would be like, you know, review session of what they prepared for us, I would imagine.
Can we have some dialogue around content of that workshop? Or are we just gonna leave it to them to propose something for our review and consideration? Or
I mean, I was gonna leave it for them to propose and then we figure getting. So part of their commitment is to get us up 2 weeks in advance, so we'll have some ability to feedback.
Can we answer that meeting or go straight into a question once we receive that, perhaps? But once we receive a suggestion about what that workshop is gonna look like.
So if we set the date for the 21st, we'd get a package from them 2 weeks before.
Yeah.
So if we felt we needed to have a meeting.
If people are flexible to say, oh, we've got it, oh, we really need to talk about this, can we find an hour that we do a Zoom meeting? On short notice, people are comfortable with that. Then we can go forward on that, and then we'll just be open, you know, that if, you know, somebody says they have concerns about me, we'll try to set one up.
And that would be like a week before.
Yes.
Well, I really like the 23rd.
So then that means then our next meeting will be in that full workshop unless there's a concern. Okay.
Not about the 21st, hopefully.
We'll do, I guess,
Yeah, I can.
yeah. See what people are free.
Great. Does that work? So any other questions? One thing I'm just wondering if it might be worthwhile, maybe I'll put it for discussion, is I'm finding that your timeline, now that we're definitely moving into a project management will be first and foremost to try to figure it out, you know, the questions like, well, where does that fit in? Is maybe to do maybe at the beginning of the meeting, just sort of a little recap on where we are with our project, where we're supposed to be and where we want it to be, et cetera. Just so that it frames our discussion as well and what the intent of our meeting would be and how far we'll get to that. I mean, that's just for more regular meetings. I think it would be good to, now that we're definitely got our consultant, we've got a plan, that it would be good to do that. Because that was a good reminder. I had forgotten until you put that up there when we said we were going to do exactly.
We can go, I mean, I know you can't see it at all from where I'm waving it at you, but this is, you know, our timeline in terms of, well, it's coming when and the details of that, so we can kind of go.
Would that be helpful to be a standing item just at the beginning of each meeting to set the tone?
We can also have that included as a standing item for information items. Is that like,
Oh, yeah, that's a good idea.
we could check.
And as part of that.
Speak up, Glenn, we can't.
Sorry, advisory committees can often cause scope creep. Make sure you're honest and bold in making sure we are aware where we're forcing scope creep, so.
Okay, we're slightly over our agenda. Any other, I'm assuming that's it on that. Any new business? Oh, sorry, that was a new business. Any other business? No, it's a placeholder. I do have a question. If I notice that these are often on our agendas, information items. Would if there is something that we should know about, is there, maybe this is a good time to ask, is there anything that you'd like to bring to the committee's attention on these information items for either us to go back and look at, or you want to raise something? I know they're often here.
So the 8.1 is our strategic plan, so they're all.
That's just all right there, yeah.
8.2 are the McElhaney minutes from our last meeting, so interesting to read. I don't think we have anything else to bring forward, and then 8.3 is just a link to the OCP, but where it lists what needs to be in a local government action for what's required to be in an OCP.
And if there was something from information items that was important, you would have brought it forward already.
We probably wouldn't.
Right,
Yeah.
Gotcha.
Just for
That's
reference.
the intention.
Yeah, that's the intention. Is like, this is like, oh, for more reading.
Yeah.
Yeah.
But one assumes that people have read the information.
Okay, so like,
More people out.
back to our agenda question period. Are there any questions from?
Members of the public, which are two counselors. I have no one online.
Okay,
No.
okay, and well, we talked about next week. Was this in our calendars first?
Would not be yet.
Not yet. So this will be, next meeting will be
In January.
in January to be determined based on, gotcha.
Preferably the 20th.
It's a 4-hour workshop.
Yeah, they will be coming for the whole day. There will be some aspects of that that are just with staff, working through some things as well as today's committee. We're anticipating
Can you hang on for
about
2 seconds?
4 hours.
Judy? Don't, it's cute.
Okay, that takes us to 12:36, and can I get a?
You're already winning.
Can I get a motion to, am I doing it correctly? To adjourn the meeting, is that what I do?
I like unanimous consent. adjournment.
Oh, really? Okay.
Yes.
So I have unanimous consent to adjourn the meeting, or do you guys want to chit chat a little further? Okay.